Hello everyone, I'm Adam Millward. I'm co-founder and CEO of Metadata Works. And I guess I'm a data engineer by background. I don't know, do we have any data engineers in the audience? Anyone willing to admit it? Yeah, kinda. Yeah, okay, we've got a few. So I don't know whether we're going to like what I'm about to say or agree with me, but I think the thing about us data engineers is our job is to get machines to communicate more effectively. And we're good at communicating with machines, and we do that all the time. And this is a generalization, what we're not necessarily as good at is communicating with other people. And I think that's often where some of these projects fall down. One of the things they used to say to me is, what's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert data engineer? And it's that an extrovert data engineer looks at your shoes when he's talking to you. And I think that kind of sums us up. Great with machines, not necessarily as good talking to other people. And I think that's the thing that stopped most of the big projects I've worked on. The technical challenges are complex and they're difficult, but you can usually work through them and you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. But some of those human problems, they can be a lot more difficult. They're the barriers and the doors that just get closed, and they're really difficult to open. So I guess, that's what this presentation is all about, and that's really why I got into this business, is to try and open some of those doors. And this presentation is called You Can't Do It All, because I guess earlier on in my career, I got quite overwhelmed when I was working on these big data integration projects and discovery projects and governance projects, especially in the public sector. There's often lots of distributed organizations. You had this kind of mandate centrally, but actually the decision-making was distributed. And if you tried to do it all, you essentially would have a breakdown. You were set these impossible tasks again and again and again. So I think, this presentation is really about how can you federate metadata management so you concentrate on the things that matter. And really you can try and get other people to do some of this to help you with some of those human challenges that often block these big data integration projects. But before I kind of get started on the case study, I quite like to start these presentations with why I became a data engineer, because I was thinking about what kind of attracted me to this discipline. Why did I get into this data stuff? And for me anyway, my earliest memory is being kind of around 4 or 5 years old, and my mother was sick. And at the time, I didn't really know what was going on. But it turned out she had breast cancer, and we were living in London at the time, and she went for treatment at the Royal Marsden Hospital. And actually, they gave her this experimental regimen of chemotherapy at the time called Triple M. It's not really used now, but it's a long time ago. And it worked really, really well. Within 4 or 5 months, she was actually cancer-free, which was amazing. I remember her being well again. I didn't know what was going on. She was sick, then she was well. And then fast forward kind of 6 years later, and I was about to start secondary school, and I was a bit older, I was a bit more aware of what was going on. And unfortunately, she was diagnosed again. And at the time, we'd moved to another part of the country, and she went to a different hospital in Plymouth, the Federate hospital. And the oncologist there gave her the regimen of drugs that was on the clinical pathway at the time that seemed like the recommended regimen of drugs. And I remember this a bit better. She was getting more and more ill. It wasn't working. And my folks relayed this story to me, and they said they went to the oncologist and they had that conversation and said, look, there was a regimen that worked really, really well. It worked before, and this isn't working. We're using something different. What were we using before? Can we go back and try that again? And the oncologist said, look, I don't know what it is. I can try and call the hospital, but we can't get that information through. We can't contact the oncology department. And at the time, there was no central record that you could pull up. So I have to give you the recommended pathway. That's my job. I have to, I can only make a decision based upon the data, the facts that I've got. And they, again, relay the story that actually my dad ended up driving to London 5 hours, sitting down in the oncology department, and basically saying, I'm not leaving until I get these paper records. And it was photocopied. It was a file, a folder, and he again, got consent. He had a letter from my mother. And he took these files, he took them to the oncology department in Plymouth, gave it to the oncologist. And there's a nice ending to this story, because the oncologist said, okay, well, in that case, it might not be the recommended pathway, but I can see that it worked before. Let's try it. And yeah, it's amazing. It's a nice story, ending to the story. She got better again within 4 or 5 months. And I guess I tell this story because, you know, as an impressionable young child, you know, here, you know, I saw it was my dad. He got some data, he moved it around, and he saved my mum. And I think quite often we get disconnected from the real world implications of working in data. What we do in our, you know, daily jobs and daily tasks actually has a huge implication on often thousands of people's lives. And I think it's a really good way of, you know, understanding what we do and, you know, making it important, and why probably we've all been attracted to this discipline. So I guess that's a bit about me. In terms of most of the projects we work with, these are the types of things I think we're all grappling with. You know, the organisations we work with have rising demand for services. We do a lot in healthcare. We know it's an ageing population. We know there are more constrained budgets. And we know there's a pressure for greater transparency. So everyone's basically being asked to do more with less. And, you know, data is this magic thing that can help you do more with less. It can help you innovate. It can help you automate. It can help you optimize. So let's do more with data. And we know everyone's talking about large language models at the moment. There are quite a few out there. And they're working out how we apply those large language models to our organization's problems. And, you know, fine-tuning is one strategy. And you can fine-tune your models on domain-specific data. I'm not an expert in this area, but this is, you know, this is the strategy that our customers are taking, which is great. There's so much opportunity here, and this is what we all want to do. The trouble is that we've got to get the domain-specific data, and people have talked around that a lot at this conference. And getting the data isn't easy. So I think, you know, the research is out there. There are different stats in different papers, but as a data engineer, you're probably only spending about 1/3 of your time doing data engineering. You're probably spending the other 2/3 talking to people, sat in meetings, trying to work out the governance, doing the data discovery, doing all the things that sit around getting that data and starting to move it around. And a lot of these are human problems. You know, it's talking to people, finding out who you need to talk to. And I think it's not just a kind of generic problem. We have another client, Health Data Research UK, who did a survey in the UK around health data. They said, we've got this fantastic health data set in the NHS. We've got great life sciences companies. We've got universities, skilled workforce. Why aren't we doing more? And again, it probably comes as no surprise to a lot of people here, but the two big problems that they found across the community were finding and accessing data. It's really, really hard. And understanding data and readiness. So you finally got access to the data, but it's chucked over the fence, and it's not really in a format that's usable. You've got weird and wonderful column names. It's not ready for your large language models. It's not ready for analytics. It's not really research ready. So I guess that's what some of these types of organizations, and I'll talk about a case study with ADR UK, are trying to do. They're trying to essentially empower a community of practice around data, make it more findable, enable the usage of all of the data that's out there. And Administrative Data Research UK essentially sits as a public sector organisation, and the grant funder. They sponsor lots of these trusted data institutes across government, and they want to bring all of the information together. Things like the UK Census, for instance, and make them you know, more usable, which is great. The trouble with organisations like ADR UK and a lot of public sector organisations is they are distributed organisations, and that means there are lots of partners. They're all using different technologies. They're at different levels of maturity. Often this is very private, sensitive information about all of us. So it's in a secure environment. So in one sense, you have to secure it all. In another sense, they're asking you to publish it all to the public and make it transparent. And these are kind of two conflicting and competing aims. Often heterogeneous data, so lots of different types of data and administrative data. It's not all the same, so how do you link it? How do you make sure that you've got commonality and standardization? And it's a small team, so there's less than a person actually doing data management for Administrative Data Research UK. Really, they're giving their money out to all of these departments and other organizations to do it. So, you know, it's a really great goal. But there are some challenges, you know, with all of these different organizations. Not only that, you're not looking at, you know, managing it across distributed organizations. You've also got to try and empower all of these different data users. And they've all got different data needs. So the public will want a different view of what data you've got from data stewards, from analysts, from research. So it's a really tough environment to make data discoverable. So before I go into kind of what we did with ADR UK, just a little bit of background to them. So they've got 5 large trusted research environments. The Office for National Statistics in England, we've got NISRA, the Northern Irish Statistical Research Authority, we've got the Sale Data Bank in Wales, and then we've got 2 bodies in Scotland, Scottish Government and National Records Scotland. And essentially what ADR UK wanted to do was establish a data discovery platform in these different themes across all of these trusted research environments. So how can we bring the information together? They felt like there was a huge amount of benefit if we started linking across a wider population, and they wanted to provide a platform to do that. Now, when I went to some of my consultants, they kind of outlaid the problem, and I had to have a ChatGPT generated joke and image in here, so this is what they came up with. But this is the kind of problem you have. So let me get this straight. You're asking me to turn your ultra-sensitive data into this user-friendly masterpiece, but I can't actually touch or see the data because it's in this super secure hideout. This is the kind of problem, like a chef trying to cook a gourmet meal blindfolded. Bon appetit. This is tough, right? You're asking me to go out, find your data, make it discoverable, make it really, really user-friendly, but I don't have access to it. So how do I get around? I have to deal with humans now. How do I get around these human problems? Not only that, even if we could access it, and even if we could profile it, because we could deploy profilers into those organizations, they could profile it themselves, desensitize it, give us the outputs, there would be thousands of tables, hundreds of thousands of columns. As a small team, less than a person, are they going to really write data dictionaries for all this stuff? It wasn't really going to work. So we had to look at a different way of managing all of this information. So we took a decentralized approach. We thought there's no way we can deploy a central catalog, get all these organizations to log on, to connect to it. There's no way it was going to happen. We knew that some of the organizations already had data catalogs, so we were already working with the Office for National Statistics. Scottish Government had an open data catalog. Sale had a JSON API, so they had built an in-house system, and they just needed to modify their API a little bit to pull some of this information out. And then 2 organizations had spreadsheets, so a real mix of different levels of maturity. So the kind of strategy was, okay, how do we federate this? So keep them doing what they're doing if it's good, and bring this all together through a single interface. And what I'll talk through today is the kind of steps that we took to build this type of environment. And let me just check on the time to make sure I'm not going. And those steps were really agreeing a common schema. So I think this applies to all projects. It doesn't just have to be a federated data catalog. You need to define what information you want to capture. We needed to agree some common filters. So what are people filtering on? How are they going to search for this information? We then needed to connect to these various different catalogs, and in some cases deploy catalogs to give them tools to manage their data more effectively. And then because we were federating this and asking each organization to do it themselves, we needed to have a reporting layer that sat on top of all of this so that the central board could find out, baseline what people were doing, make sure they're improving it, make sure they were engaged, because it's all very well paying for the tools and the people and giving them budget. But you need to have a view of, are they actually doing the work? Are they making the information more discoverable? So we needed to have a reporting strategy. And then when we did all of this and put it out there, we then needed to fine-tune the discovery experience. So it's all about fine-tuning search. And that's really the stage that we are at the moment with this particular project. So we'll start with the first step, which is your schema for data products. So what do I mean by a schema for data products? It's the what, the why, the when, the where, and the who. And how do you get all of these different organizations to agree on this? Because everyone goes off and does their own thing. The first thing we did was establish a technical working group. So we had the board, that was the kind of business medium to bring everyone together. And then we had a working group that fed into the board. And those were the people on the ground, the technical experts who were actually doing the metadata curation and data stewardship in these organizations. We got a shopping basket of standards and got them to agree on what that was. So the ones we selected were DCAT, so that's the WC3 Data Catalog Vocabulary. We asked them to collect schema.org, so if you're publishing on the internet, Google are really good at crawling schema.org, so if you want it to be searchable and you want your SEO to improve, that's obviously a good one to use. DDI is Data Documentation Initiative, so we worked on lots of surveys, and so there's potentials and attributes there that we're interested. And then Dublin Core is your kind of standard one. And we said, right, whatever we do in the schema, we're going to try and take from this shopping basket first to say this is useful. And then if there's something that isn't in the shopping basket, maybe we'll think about creating it. And it got around all of those kind of conversations about we want to call it this and we want to call it that. No, this is the standard, so this is what we share, and we've agreed on that. We then went out, saw what the catalogs collected, tried to map that to the standards that we had. Then went out to the users and said, does this look like a good bunch of things? Which bits do you think are really, really useful? What would you use if you are going to search for this data? So we interviewed a few people. We developed a draft. We put it out there. We tested it. We deployed it. And we iterated on it. So we told people this is a draft, and went through the kind of alpha, beta, and then to live, and said, look, every year we'll probably update this based on your feedback. And again, that got round all of, if people think that things are never going to change, it takes so long to agree, but to tell them this is going to iterate was really useful. However, we've got a schema for data products. The next question for some of these organizations, and we have this all the time, is what is a data product? It's kind of a philosophical question in many ways. If you've got a data warehouse, which bits of it do you cut up? What do your users want? My data product's my whole data warehouse. Well, okay, that's great. It's not necessarily going to become discoverable. So one of the exercises we do with organizations is we look at the data product canvas. It's based on something, Leonardo Carvalho did a blog on it. There are a few different ones out there. It's basically based on the business model canvas, essentially. And there's some kind of interesting things in there. You look at domains, that's a place to start. And there are activities that fall out of this. You have to decide your domains. And then you have to see, where the data fits. You need to look at your sources, the use cases. So how are people going to use the data? Consumers, stakeholders. Keywords allow you to think, okay, what's this data really about? Which bits do I need to collect? Then you look at your design. That can be very high level, or that can be technical. Where is it going to be accessed? In this case, you've got safe rooms, safe pods. They've actually assured connectivity. What kind of metadata do we want to collect from a very high level, which links back to the schema? And then your KPIs. And this is something that I think is really, really important. This is done on a catalog level rather than a particular product level, but links into the product. So usage. So how are we going to measure usage? Is it how many queries people are running against this data? In this case, it was more around data access requests. So how many people are requesting to access it? Visits. So how many people are coming to the website, searching for the data, clicking on the links? And engagement. How many people are converting and they search for something and they actually click on a link and start reading it? We've got things like service desks, so how many people are asking questions about a particular data set. That shows some kind of engagement. Quality, standard dimensions in there. Availability, so is it online all the time? And then impact, so I'll talk a little bit about that, but there are ways you can start to measure impact. It's a difficult challenge, but it's not impossible, and there's kind of concrete steps that you can take to make sure that you've got at least a way of measuring impact for a data set, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second. So what next? We've kind of brought the team together, we've agreed a schema, we're starting to connect all the catalogs, and we're trying to get them to fill out the information on their data products. So what I would say is resist the temptation to start profiling everything, because that's what people go into. I'm technical as well. I like the technical stuff. I like to get into the weeds straight away. But we're creating a data product catalog. And if you think about the most successful product catalog on the internet, it's Amazon. And we all use it all the time. And if you're on Amazon, so recently I was on Amazon. It's a bit of a segue, but it snowed in the UK last week, and we're terrible with snow, so we don't have winter tires or anything. And I dropped my girl off in school. We live at the bottom of a big hill. Got to the top of the hill, it was still snowing. And I stopped my car, and And I got out the car and I looked down the hill and started walking down the hill. And as I looked up, the car slowly started sliding down. It was one of those comedy moments where you're kind of, do I try and stop it? Do I run the other way? Kind of Charlie Chaplin being chased by the car. Luckily, it jackknifed in the road and stopped. So right after that, I went straight on Amazon. I looked for snow chains. And scrolling down snow chains, it took me about 4 or 5 pages of scrolling before I got to the technical specs. And by the time I got to technical specs, I kind of decided I wanted these snow chains anyway. They were yellow, they looked really cool, I'd seen all the pictures, I'd seen the description. And I think that's the type of approach we would try and recommend people take to data. You've done your filtering, and you will get into the technical specs because you need that, but how can we really sell this data set to all of our users? How can we get them interested? And that's what we try and encourage people to do, is add some of this descriptive content, the stuff around the descriptive schema, before you get into the weeds, the detail, which you need, obviously. But so some of the things we tried to get people to do, and it worked really, really well, and encouraged this network of people to start filling things in, was summary information. So you've got your data product, you've got your first page, and what did people want to see? They wanted to see a short abstract, so they found out whether it was useful. But they wanted to see videos. We live in an age where people are doing webinars all the time. They're talking about their data, and people consume content in lots of different ways. I was at a conference a year ago or something, and a lady had built her own data catalog. She said, I've put all of this effort in, I've put all the metadata in, and people are still asking me the same questions. No one's reading it. They're not reading the manual. And some of us love reading technical manuals. Other ones would prefer to watch a video. And actually, the videos are all out there. We record half of our Zoom calls anyway, so let's stick that up there. You're the expert, get them into it, get them into the data, and that can feed into a data literacy program. Here are the articles we've written about it, here are the blogs. So we really encourage people to do that. It also allowed them to build their personal profile as an expert. So again, you're giving them some carrots to take part in the process. They're getting some credit. The other thing that we're really trying to do is the DOIs, so digital object identifiers. So we talked about tracking impact. DOIs have been around for ages in publishing. So if you publish an academic paper, your academic paper has a digital object identifier. And then if other people use it in their publication, they cite you. And if they cite you a lot, then that shows you've had a lot of impact with your paper, and you get rewarded for that, and your organization gets rewarded for that. And we should be doing exactly the same thing with data, right? You put all of this work to create an amazing data set, loads of people use it, and the guy builds, trains the large language model, or who builds the dashboard, he gets all the credit. But you've put all of the work into curating it. And actually what you do is way more valuable, because you can build loads and loads of bits of software and dashboards and all sorts out of one very well curated product. So DOIs are a way of starting to track impact, and there are tools, I'll go into it, there's tools to track it, but basically you get a small regular expression, you can crawl all of your SharePoint or whatever it is, and you can start to see who's using that and tracking impact. And then you've got a clear call to action. So, what do you want people to do? Do you want people to contact you? Do you want people to request access to the data? Do you want to signpost them to the data environment? Do you want them to give you feedback? So, you need to make that kind of clear. Documentation, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. This is where the longer description comes in. Is it part of something else? Is it, reference any standards? Coverage, so I think this is super important. So, and this can be done in different ways. So in this particular project, it was a national project. So basically it was like England, Wales, Scotland. We wanted a very high level, but you can do bounding boxes, you can do vector, you can do all sorts of things around this. But you need to understand, what's the coverage of the data and actually how granular is it. So temporal coverage, start, latest, how often is it updated? We did the project with Health Data Research UK during COVID, and one of the things, which isn't in this particular catalogue, but it's in their catalogue, came off the back of Cabinet Office came to us and started searching for data for COVID surveillance. And they actually went through the process of finding data in the catalogue and then going to the data controllers, trying to get access to it, getting into the data set, and realizing actually there was a 1-month time lag on some of these data sets. You're doing COVID surveillance, 1-month time lag, it's already gone, there's no, that's not useful. So we kind of brought in time lag as also something that's quite useful around temporal coverage. provenance, utility, trustworthiness, what's the source, what's the collection situation, is it self-reported? If you're looking at medical stuff, was the weight self-reported or was it in a clinic on scales? That might affect the way someone trusts the data and someone uses the data. What are the related data sets? So links out to other data sets. Tools is another thing that we've brought people in. So do you have GitHub repositories? Do you have any types of tools connected to the data? That's been quite useful. Dashboards. And then usage. So you've gone through all of this, you've decided it's interesting. Now actually what's the governance? Will you be able to use it? And there's some ontologies out there around, there's a data use ontology, for instance, Duo, you can use to define some of this stuff, and then you've got your kind of access service, access levels, jurisdictions, and these can be tailored for your organization. These were the ones we agreed on. And then format, is it in CSV, is it starter, is it, do you need extra software to process some of this information? So we had all of that stuff. The other thing people wanted to know was major versions. So if they sign up and subscribe to a data set, they want to know it's changed. So this particular one gets changed. Is it a monthly basis? It gets updated. So if it's updated, what are the major changes? We don't want minor and patch changes. If it's a real-time data set, obviously you don't want to know every millionth time the record's updated. So we went for kind of major versions. If it, in some cases, if a column changes or you've added a new table, let's add that in. Then we can tell the people who are interested and subscribe to this particular record. And then obviously your data dictionary. So then you come, people have decided it's interesting, it fits their use case. Now let's get into it. Does it have the particular column that I want? Does it have the particular piece of information that I want? When I've got luref in my CSV file as a header, what the hell does that mean? And in this case, we've got a description, local unit, unique identifier. Now, I know this data set. I know it's the annual business survey. So to me, that makes sense. But what we tried to do is also have a feedback loop. So if someone still doesn't understand the definition, go back to the service desk. This data element has a unique ID. Suddenly they've asked a question about a thing with a unique ID. Someone can then go and update the catalog and improve it. And I think that's a way of, again, not doing it all. So you get this cycle where your users tell you what's important to document. And when they've got a question about a particular column, and you're creating this data dictionary, you don't have to have definitions for every single column in your table. Just do the ones you think are important. And then your users, they'll come in, if they like the data set, they'll come and tell you, and they'll ask the question, and then you can update it. So that was a kind of really useful way of improving this. So I think, at this point, we're up and running. We've got a data catalog. We think, it's working. We've deployed it in the organizations who didn't have them. We've baselined things now, but everyone's busy, right? And we wanted to improve it. So how do we now, motivate people to take part in the program? Just check the time. So this is actually from a different project, HDR UK. It's a lot prettier chart, which is why I've included it. It's exactly the same concept. It's just with ADR UK, we've only got 4 organizations on this particular chart. But we had exactly the same problem with HDR UK. We didn't have a carrot. We were not paying people loads of money to document their metadata. We didn't have a stick because we weren't anyone's boss. We were a kind of consultancy working for an organization in the Federated, But we did know people are competitive. And we did know there were board meetings and there were bi-weekly newsletters. So what we did is we created a league table and we put all of the organizations on the bottom and we put the number of data products that they've submitted through the site. And then we just looked at 2 things, completeness and validity of the metadata they've provided, of all that descriptive information which our users had said was super, super useful. And we sent out every 2 weeks. The ADR one we do at the board every month. And lo and behold, we sent this out. The chief medical officer and chief research officer got hold of this for a couple of these organizations, and they were down the bottom, realized they were behind kind of Cambridge University and some of their competing organizations, and very, very quickly, they leapfrogged up the table and stayed there all the time. So getting this kind of gamification process, I think, was really, really successful. The nice thing about this is it doesn't point fingers at the people who are actually doing the work. This is looking at board level, so it's looking at the people who are driving this, and they tend to be very competitive people. So another thing, so we've done this one with ADR UK. This one we haven't done with ADR UK. We're still going through it. But the other thing people love, which was really surprising to me, was medals. People absolutely love badges and medals. And we put medals on all of the data sets in Health Data Research UK, platinum, gold, silver. And I had literally professors, really, really eminent people coming to me in some of these workshops that we had with HDR UK saying, I've got all platinum metadata. And they were very, very proud of doing it. The only caveat I would say about this is you have to think carefully about how you generate the badge. And we've written a research paper that I can share around the types of things, because it's not all the attributes in your specification are equal. There are some things that are more important. You need to reflect that. If someone's filled out, data dictionary, potentially they need to get more points towards their badge because that takes more time and might be more useful. So we've deployed the catalogs. We've agreed a schema that allows us to federate all of this information. Hopefully it's useful to the users because we've gone through that process. We're selling the data because we've got all the associated media. We've started motivating our users, and we've got a way at board level to encourage them to take part in it. The next question is kind of, so what? Okay, we've done all this work, we've populated a catalogue. So what? We've spent all this money, what are we going to get in return? What's the impact? And this comes back to DOIs. So if you've got a digital object identifier for all of your data products, you can start to track the impact of that particular product. So you can look at citations. If this is kind of publicly accessible, there's already services out there like Altmetric who will look on Twitter and Facebook and news outlets and research databases. You can crawl your own SharePoint DOI, you get a regex for it, you can find all your DOIs, and then you can track who's used it. So as long as you update your license policy and usage policy and say you use the data, you have to cite it, you can hopefully shift and change the culture around this. So you can see the number of citations, you can look at the number of views your metadata records are getting. So people searching for that metadata, which bits of metadata they're clicking on, and that shows that data set's interesting. You can look at data access requests is another thing we're looking at. So how many people are going to those data products, searching for it, clicking on it, and then going, yeah, I want that. And they click and request access to that information. So this is one of the ways that I think you can start to measure impact. And again, with citations, when you look at papers, then you can see, has that driven change to policy, and you can relate, a value back to that data set. So I think, we've got to a point now that we're, tracking impact, and what we're thinking about again, what kind of benefits does this have? And these are the kind of things that we're talking about with our users. They're telling us that it's accelerating innovation. It's easier to find the data. It's enabling secure data sharing, because what's happened is the researchers are looking at 3 or 4 different data sets they want to pull together, and suddenly it's facilitating conversations between those organizations to link information more effectively. You're promoting data literacy because you've put media up, you've linked to videos, you've linked to ways to using your data. Cutting down data search time. We've got engineers from the ONS who say, now I don't even have to answer the email, I just tell them, go look at the catalogue, which is great. Engineers love that. Freeing up, cutting down searching, you're streamlining governance. Another interesting thing is adopting standards and monitoring usage. So that's a new thing we're bringing in. So how many people have actually adopted standards in their data dictionaries? How many people are referencing those standards? That's quite interesting. When we're strategically looking at how we can change the landscape. And it's a new project, but ultimately this is what we're trying to do across government. We're creating policies that meet a rising demand for services. We're going to be driving efficiency within constrained budgets, and we're definitely adapting to regulatory pressure where there's this clear mandate to make this sensitive data more transparent and usable across these federated networks. So I think that's okay. I've run through it fairly quickly. I've probably got then 10 minutes for questions, if there are any. I'll start with this gentleman.
I've got the inverse question.
Okay.
If you're a small group and you need to federate most of the work, what's the most important thing you should hold on to yourself?
So the question is, if you're a small group federating with other organizations, presumably, in terms of ownership, what do you want to keep in-house? It's quite a general it's quite a general question. It depends what your aims are as a small team. I mean, I'm definitely an advocate of not keeping anything in-house. We come from an open source background. I changed that. There are some private things you can't. So things like your data stewards, your data owners, often that's personally identifiable information about the way your organization works. So you might have a contact point and you might try and route all of the queries through a service desk, but you don't necessarily want an email address of someone on that data set, because also that person might change. So you have a responsible role for the data, so that's the data steward, and there's an inbox that you create on your service desk if anyone asks questions. But you're not going to make any of that information available, and although we ask everyone to record this type of stuff, they don't do that. So that's, yeah, I think that's an example. I've got a question at the back. I think your hand was up first, and then.
This is a bit more in the technical question, but just to clarify, you guys have DOI and all measure integration rates in your system?
Yeah, so DOI, we're a member of DataSite, so part of the kind of open data. So yeah, we've got an integration to mint those. And we can also, if someone has their own DOI organization, we can mint on behalf of them as well. The Altmetric, essentially it's a badge, it's really easy, but you have to have a commercial arrangement with Altmetric because they charge you for the amount of badges. There's also Plum Analytics, and that's more of a non-commercial agreement, so it depends what your budget is, depends what you want. The Altmetric service gives you a bit more visibility. You've got Plum Analytics is probably less visibility, but is free. So there's different, yeah. Yeah, so our clients, the clients in this one, the ones who've picked up Altmetric are Office for National Statistics. So they've got an agreement with Altmetrics and they've bought a certain number of badges for their DOIs. So essentially we integrate through the DOIs with that service, and those badges are tied to the organization so they're allowed to produce them. In terms of sensitivity, I would say if they tell you that you're not allowed to mint a DOI for your organization, you definitely push back against it, because I think there's nothing sensitive about that information. Okay, yeah, I think that's, and again, it ties to the point of what you need to kind of keep in. I think, yeah, the ORCID IDs are a little bit more difficult. And yeah, we've had similar types of things. It depends who it is in the organization. So some people, as part of their job role, will have a public profile, and there's some information that you can make accessible. But yeah, ORCID ID is definitely different. Once you're getting into the people who are involved with the data, your SMEs, it becomes a little bit more challenging publishing that. Cool, we've got a question here.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So you talked a lot about kind of federating out the actual metadata, the ingest of the actual metadata, multiple different groups, divisions, companies. I'm wondering, do you have sort of like a framework or a process that you work through to kind of get them to agree on a model that works for everybody? So, if you have 5 different companies, they probably at some point have their own kind of goal. How do you kind of bring those people together to agree on kind of the critical elements that work for everybody that needs to be captured amongst all the different data sets?
So yeah, it's not an easy process. I think it's about setting up the technical working group, and the first thing you need to do is agree a set of principles, and we tend to try and make people agree. Before we've decided what elements there are, we've tried to decide what standards we will use, and then the process that if the thing that we're trying to share and integrate doesn't sit within the standards, then the process for agreeing that across the group. And usually if you've got a decent shopping basket of standards to use, you'll find what you need within that. It might not be exactly what you need, and you might need to label it slightly differently because it's slightly different in your context, but for the most part, we direct them that way because they've already agreed basically to what they're going to do before you've got to the specifics. So agreeing a set of principles when you get to these technical working groups is really, really useful, I think. Thanks. Did we have a question?
I think it might have been a very similar question covered here, but one of the issues that we run across very fast when we try to do any kind of data computation across groups is two groups that want to define the same data element with two different definitions. And sometimes there's maybe regulation or legislative mandate behind the reason why group A needs to define this way and group B needs to define it another way. And I guess I was just wondering if you had a specific example of that and how you guys work through that.
Maybe we're not quite there on this project, and we've got another one with social care in the UK where we're trying to build a social care record for the whole of the UK for 27,000 providers, and we've got exactly that problem. We've got a whole load of assured suppliers who all have different ways of recording information about individuals and have their own reasons for recording it that way. I can share the governance structure. We've got a number of different boards, essentially, and the suppliers and various different groups have representation on each of those boards. It's not an easy thing to do. But what I would say is running lots and lots of consultation workshops with everyone on a kind of monthly basis to show them what you're doing and your reasoning behind it, and allowing them to input and having basically all of those conversations in the open is really, really useful. It can be tricky, but I think the worst thing is if you go away and invent something really, really good that they don't feel they're involved in. That's always been the challenge. I've done it before. I did it in a couple of healthcare projects at the beginning, and that's where I've got really, really stuck. Not that it's easy if you involve them across the whole process. It's still tough, and you still have to have your governance structures and ways of resolving when there is a particular disagreement within that. But I would say the thing that's worked on the social care is that we've got lots and lots of people to input, to add feedback, and we've involved them throughout the process. But yeah, ultimately you need a governance structure that says if people disagree, this is the forum, this is the group, and we all vote. Cool. Any more questions? In that case, thank you for your time today. Feel free to contact me if you've got any more questions, and enjoy the rest of the conference.